Hey guys, welcome back. So now getting right back into our talks about the year of the villain, to where at this point we get to see a lot more of what Lex Luthor has been up to since achieving his transformation into the apex predator, which more specifically is the human-Martian hybrid that Perpetua had always deemed as the perfect soldier, who would later then wield the forces of Perpetua. And Lex Luthor, who at this point in time isn't so much worried about the Justice League, but rather he's going throughout the multiverse and taking out his greatest threat, which he truly believes is himself, because of course it is, like this guy's ego. Well, let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so prior to this point, with everything that we've been talking about throughout Justice League, from the totality to the forces of Perpetua, the destruction of the Source Wall, and the Justice League traveling into the 6th dimension, oh, and also the Batman Who Laughs, who's the person who's been coaching Lex Luthor in this direction from the very beginning. And I got links down below in playlists to catch you up on all of that, and so don't worry, I got you. But one of the things we've also seen up to this point, since Lex Luthor has exited his incubation after faking his death and sending out different messages to a number of villains, and like we talked about, along with these messages, he's sending out a lot of funds too. But depending on who he would be soliciting at the time, sometimes the information would be more important than money. But whatever each individual needed, he made sure that he had some form of leverage in order to draw them into his cause. Much like what we talked about recently with Lex Luthor promising Nightwing to the Court of Owls, and even him making his offer to Jason Todd, which, as I mentioned before, sounds a lot like Lex wants Jason Todd to be like the Batman of the Legion of Doom, and doing so by playing a similar role to what Batman would play in the Justice Doom War. But after this, since Lex Luthor pretty much absorbed Martian Manhunter, and in doing so using his DNA to become this hybrid, which completed his transformation and prepared him to wield the forces of Perpetua, but throughout the process of reaching this power, we find that he's traveling throughout the multiverse to eliminate his biggest threat, what he perceives to be himself. But along with Luthor doing this, he also creates allies along the way. And so one of the first places we see him visit is actually Earth 38, which I'm sure many of you guys know that number designation is modeled after the year 1938, which is when we got the first appearance of Superman within Action Comics. But also on Earth 38, you also have Batman, who first appeared the very next year in Detective Comics issue 27, and essentially Earth 38 is built off of the version of these two who met for the first time and eventually teamed up. And so now when Lex Luthor travels here, he arrives much earlier than when all that took place. And when he arrives here looking for himself, to whom at this time is still a child, we find this younger Lex in a very similar situation to what we talked about in the Justice League playlist pertaining to his drunk and abusive father. And so now at this point in time, we don't really know if his father has the same past like we'd seen with Prime Earth Lex Luthor when Vandal Savage had wiped his memory, which led him to be the alcoholic abusive father that Lex remembered. Like, we really don't know if that also applies here on Earth 38, which I kind of doubt, because I think this version of his father, he's just a drunk with no deep backstory, he just drunk. And so when Apex Lex arrives here and he sees his younger self, it's more or less like he takes himself under his wing. And although he initially presents himself in a humanoid form to where the younger Lex immediately recognizes him, but not long after, he shows his younger self the truth, and immediately he gives himself like the DC Rebirth ultimate spill. And with doing so, he introduces himself to the reality of the multiverse and the plans of Perpetua, to which he's able to do with the Martian portion of his powers. But not long after, when his Earth 38 dad wakes up, to whom Apex Lex had kind of induced and made him go to sleep, but when he wakes up, he tries to negotiate with Apex Lex by telling him, "Don't take the kid, take me, I want to live," which was a pretty low and scummy move, which essentially got him microwaved in the middle of the kitchen. But from here, after taking the younger Lex Luthor from Earth 38, Apex Luthor then travels to Earth 45, which is most notable for being the home world of Super Doomsday, aka Super Doom. And so now for Super Doom, he's done some multiversal traveling himself. And when Lex arrives here on Earth 45, he actually arrives in the future of this world. But before we get into that, I want to talk about Super Doom for a second. Because on Earth 45, you have your super genius Clark Kent, who built a machine with Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen that used sound vibrations and could turn thoughts into reality. And with this invention, they wanted to create a Superman who would be the world's protector, but they just didn't have the financial backing to see it through. So then they pursued this backing from Overcorp, who essentially robbed them of their idea and technology because they didn't have any lawyers in a negotiation, but at the same time, Clark and the others couldn't go any further without their assistance. But after getting this technology, Overcorp flipped the whole Superman idea into something they deemed to be more marketable so that they could profit immensely off of this hero of the world, and like a lucrative plan of world domination, which they were very successful at for quite some time. But also with Super Doom's programming, they had made it so that he would want to kill every other competition or every other competitor, which led him through this journey throughout the Bleed to pretty much destroy every other Superman in existence, which was essentially what he was created to do. But later we come to find out that his creation was actually the works of Vindictivix, who's a fifth dimensional imp who has made multiple attempts to destroy Superman, but eventually Super Doom is defeated by Earth 23 Superman and Lex Luthor. But at the same time, in the future of Earth 45, they paid the cost for it, because even though Super Doom had made them a lot of money, with them using his brand for cereal, action figures, and pretty much anything that you could put his logo on, eventually after Super Doom's defeat, Overcorp lost everything, and as a result, both LexCorp and Wayne Corp, they have fought over the possession of what was left of the project, and in the end, LexCorp won. And with doing so, they relaunched the project and created another monster, which forced Batman to sacrifice the whole world to the Phantom Zone, which is super crazy, but likely his only option since he couldn't defeat this new monster. And so when Lex Luthor arrives here in this future world of Earth 45, he's greeted by this monster who's like the only one here, and it's here that he finds out that this super killer is DOOMTHOR, which is like your Lex Luthor Doomsday version of Super Doom, which is crazy, baked in ridiculous, and then sauteed with insanity. But when Apex Lex arrives here, DOOMTHOR thinks that he's here to destroy him, or at least try to, and really because DOOMTHOR believes that because Lex is so little, it won't be much of a fight, though I beg to differ. But with Apex Lex, who kinda just brushes it off by calling him a second-rate Frankenstein, he instead tells him more or less that he'd rather give him purpose. And so now from here, we go to the future of Earth 32, which is like your home of the Justice Titans, where a lot of the heroes there were kind of mashed up. Like you had Batman and Green Lantern, who were one person, the same for Canary and Green Arrow, Wonder Woman and Hawkgirl, The Flash and Aquaman, as well as Superman and Martian Manhunter. But it's here in the future of Earth 32 where we explore a bit of Superman's history, with his ancestors having lived on Mars, to where these Kryptonians eventually cross-populated with the Martians. And as we come to find out, also in this future, you have your Lex Luthor, who at this point has become a version of Batman, who has a butler named Fred, who looks very much like Prime Earth Superman. And so now when Apex Lex comes here to visit this Lex Luthor, he initially cloaks himself with his telepathy, but this Lex Luthor quickly figures him out, and mainly because his close friend, the Superman of this reality, who's a Kryptonian and a Martian hybrid, he has telepathy, so it's nothing new to this Bat Lex, if you will. But with Apex Lex coming here, he's come to learn something from this version of Lex Luthor, and it's not something that he could directly ask him, but rather he's going to find out by testing him. And we find out exactly what that test is when this Luthor receives a distress call from Cal, who is under a surprise attack which was set up by Apex Lex, who did so by blocking his telepathy much like he did Martian Manhunter. And it's here that we find Cal under the attack of DOOMTHOR, the Lex Luthor Doomsday version of Super Doom. Like, man, how you an alternate version of an alternate version? But the test that Apex Lex is doing here, he wants to see how this Lex Luthor will respond in this situation. Because in this moment, Apex Lex gives him the ultimatum, like, you can go save Cal, or you can stay here and fight me, which is likely Apex Lex testing this Luthor so that he'll know what decision to make at a later time. And so when Apex Lex forces him to decide one or the other, this Luthor sees that clearly he wants him to run to Cal and save him. And with Apex Lex trying to tell him that that's really his only option, this Lex Luthor doesn't buy it because he believes that if that were certainly true, Apex Lex wouldn't be here. And he tells Apex Lex, like, this is the same thing I would have done had I been alone. But since he's not, he calls his bluff and he brings in reinforcements, which shows this Apex version of Lex that even when being faced with impossible odds, he still believes that there's a victory to be won. And immediately Apex Lex is like, okay, I see what I need to see. He takes the younger Lex Luthor and he gets out of there, while telling this Lex Luthor to save his Superman if he can. And so now from here, we jump over to the future of Earth 1, where we get a bit of a reintroduction to the Black Mercy, which reminds me like one of my favorite episodes of like the old cartoons, because the Black Mercy was said to render you in a dream state, but it's here on Earth 1 that we find out that this isn't true, because instead it actually sends you to a different reality. And so now in the future of Earth 1, Lex Luthor had used the Black Mercy on Superman, causing him to live a life on Krypton, where Superman saw his people were alive, and then Earth 1 Lex Luthor woke him up, pulling that all away from him. And Earth 1 Lex was content with that. But when Apex Lex sees this future outcome of this Earth 1 Lex Luthor, he's disgusted, because Earth 1 Lex Luthor only did this to put a smile on his own face. And with Apex Lex being the embodiment of Lex Luthor's ultimate ambition, he's disgusted at the sight of this Lex Luthor and he pretty much just leaves him there to die. But even with doing so, he walks away taking this moment as a lesson learned. But with traveling throughout the multiverse, the younger Lex had a number of questions, because he would see Apex Lex destroy some Luthors and others he would just let live, and he was just asking him like, what do we gain through through all this, and the Apex Luthor tells him something that I believe is going to be pretty important later on, because he lets him know that there is no we, there's only Luthor. And with the next Lex that they see on Earth 44, who's like a shoe repairman, it was in this instance that he showed the younger Lex that making certain decisions, and that with every decision that you make, they have their consequences. But from here, make no mistake, like the slaughter definitely continued, because from there they jump to Earth 13, which is like an Earth of permanent magical twilight, super supernatural, and like each day has like 13 hours. And when they arrive here, he immediately just gets rid of this Lex Luthor, with him believing that he'd be a potential threat. And so from here, jumping to Earth 47, to where this Lex Luthor's main focus is botany. And he also makes use of the Black Mercy, to which he's built a tolerance of it by giving himself small dosages at a time, and for the most part by making tea with its leaves. But he also mentions his discovery, which is much like what we had heard in Earth 1, to where he makes the correction that the Black Mercy doesn't put you in a dream state, but rather it allows you to visit other realities. And so when he's visited here by Apex Lex and the other Lex Luthor, who I want to call Lil 38, but I think that's already a rapper name, so I'm just gonna leave that out of here. But when the two of them come to see Lex Luthor from Earth 47, they find out that he's used much of his research in botany to unlock the many secrets in human health, and at this time really doing so just to make the world a better place. And so when Apex Lex hears this and he's like, yeah, that's cool, but what are you doing with this plan in order to benefit yourself? And he's asking him this only because at this point, Apex Luthor believes that Luthor himself is the true center of a divine purpose. But the Lex Luthor here tells him that he's past that, because while giving himself portions of the Black Mercy, and in small doses of course, with doing so he's been transported to countless realities, and some of which are realities that we've seen play out before, and others just being variants of infinite possibilities which actually came true on a different Earth. But with all these different experiences and witnessing these different lifetimes, this Lex Luthor had learned that in most cases there are ways that he could serve a greater purpose. And he more or less tells the younger Lex that everything that this Apex Lex is offering you, that it's going to come at a cost that he's not telling you about, and that this whole purpose and journey that Apex Lex is going on, though he tries to make it seem like he's sacrificing himself for others, in all truth this is something he's only doing for himself. And he really hit the nail on the head with that one, because if you guys remember, back when Lex Luthor first took advice from the Batman Who Laughs, which started him on this entire journey, the Batman Who Laughs had already told Lex that this was his biggest flaw. And this Lex Luthor, who has seen and experienced a number of different realities and variants of himself, he sees right through Apex Lex and he reads him like a book. But the younger Lex, who has been doing all this traveling with Apex Lex, he just zaps him. Like he just hits him with the melting stick. But when he does this, it's here that we see that Apex Lex has really just been grooming him and teaching him so that he could eventually use him at a later time. And immediately he like changes the kid into a younger version of his human self after the kid proves that he understands that there's no other path, there's only Lex, which is something Apex has been saying this whole time. But when he brings the kid to a place to where he proves himself, it's here that we find out that at this point for quite some time, this younger Lex, he's been taken through this multiversal experience with the Black Mercy in a controlled environment which has been set up by Apex Lex. But even with doing so, his pod has been marked Lex Luthor Human DNA Backup 1.0, which I feel like is a bit of a precursor to Lex Luthor turning back to human at some point in time, or at least the human Lex showing up later on. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. There's a lot of crazy things leading us up to Justice Doom War, and I can't express enough like how ready I am to dive in. But let me know your thoughts below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.